The morning mist hung low over the grounds of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at the window of their private quarters. Her fingers traced the condensation on the glass while she watched the early groundskeepers beginning their daily routines. The world outside seemed peaceful, unaware of the storm that had been brewing within the palace walls for weeks. William had been different lately. She noticed it in the way he held his coffee cup a little too tightly during breakfast, how his jaw tensed when reading the morning briefings, and especially in the long silences that stretched between them during their evening walks through the gardens. As future king and queen consort, they had weathered many storms together, but this felt different. This felt personal. The children had already left for school, their laughter still echoing faintly in the corridors. George had hugged his father extra tightly that morning, sensing something his young mind couldn't quite understand. Charlotte had asked why Daddy looked so tired, and little Louis had simply placed his small hand on William's cheek in that innocent way children do when they want to make everything better. Catherine turned from the window as she heard William's footsteps in the hallway. His pace was slower than usual, more deliberate. When he entered their sitting room, she could see the weight he was carrying in his shoulders, the way his usually straight posture seemed slightly bent under some invisible burden. "The meeting is in an hour," he said quietly, not quite meeting her eyes. His voice carried that formal tone he used when discussing royal duties, but Catherine knew him well enough to hear the tremor beneath it. She nodded, smoothing down her navy blue dress. They had chosen their outfits carefully for this day, knowing that every detail would be scrutinized, analyzed, and interpreted by the media and the public. The dress was one of William's favorites, though she wondered if he even noticed it today. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, moving closer to him. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with all the implications of what was about to happen. William finally looked at her, and for a moment the formal mask slipped. She saw the man she had fallen in love with at university, the one who worried about doing the right thing, who carried the weight of his destiny with both pride and trepidation. "I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this," he admitted. The decision they were about to announce would send shockwaves through the Commonwealth, challenge centuries of tradition, and potentially reshape the future of the monarchy. It had been months in the making, involving countless private discussions with senior royals, government officials, and constitutional experts. But in the end, it came down to this moment between husband and wife, partners in both marriage and duty. Catherine reached out and straightened his tie, a gesture so familiar it was almost automatic. Her hands lingered on his chest for a moment, feeling the rapid beating of his heart beneath the fabric. "Whatever happens today, we face it together," she said softly. The weight of their decision pressed down on both of them. They had spent sleepless nights discussing the implications, the potential backlash, the impact on their children. William had wrestled with his conscience, torn between duty to the crown and what he believed was right for the future. Catherine had been his anchor through it all, listening without judgment, offering perspective when his thoughts became too tangled to sort through alone. "The children will understand someday," Catherine continued, reading his thoughts as she so often did. "When they're older, they'll see that sometimes doing the right thing requires courage." William nodded, but she could see the doubt still flickering in his eyes. The burden of being second in line to the throne meant that every decision was magnified, every choice scrutinized for its impact on the institution they served. This decision felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once they stepped forward there would be no going back. The sound of approaching vehicles could be heard through the windows. The media had been gathering since dawn, their cameras and satellite trucks creating a small city outside the palace gates. Social media was already buzzing with speculation about the nature of the announcement, with theories ranging from the mundane to the extraordinary. "Your father will understand," Catherine said, though they both knew King Charles would struggle with any decision that challenged the established order. The relationship between father and son had grown stronger over the years, but this would test it in ways neither of them had anticipated. William walked to his desk and picked up the speech he had been revising until the early hours of the morning. The words had been carefully chosen, each phrase crafted to convey both respect for tradition and the necessity of change. He had written and rewritten the opening lines dozens of times, searching for the perfect balance between formality and humanity. "Do you remember what you told me on our wedding day?" Catherine asked, moving to stand beside him at the desk. He looked up, a small smile finally breaking through the tension. That I was the luckiest man in the world. And what else? That we would face whatever came our way together as equals. The memory seemed to give him strength, straightening his shoulders slightly. Catherine squeezed his hand. That hasn't changed. It never will. The clock on the mantel chimed, marking another step closer to the moment that would define their future. William folded the speech and placed it in his jacket pocket, next to the photograph he always carried of their family. It was a candid shot from their last holiday, all 5 of them laughing at something Louis had said, completely unguarded and natural. Are you proud of the decision we've made? He asked suddenly, the question carrying more weight than the simple word suggested. Catherine considered her answer carefully. Pride seemed too simple a word for the complex emotions she felt. There was fear, certainly, and excitement, and a deep sense of responsibility. But underneath it all was a conviction that they were doing what their hearts and their consciences told them was right. I'm proud of you, she said finally. I'm proud of us, and I believe history will prove we made the right choice. As they prepared to leave for the most important announcement of their royal careers, Catherine took one last look around their private sitting room. After today, nothing would be quite the same. The quiet moments like this would become even more precious, and the simple act of being husband and wife would carry new complexities. But as William offered her his arm, and they walked toward the door together, Catherine felt a sense of calm settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them as they always had, side by side, united in purpose and love. The walk down the long corridor felt like a journey through time itself. Each portrait of their ancestors seemed to watch them with knowing eyes, as if understanding the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Catherine's heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor, creating a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Beside her, William moved with the measured pace of a man who had been trained from birth for moments like this, yet she could sense the nervous energy radiating from him. They passed the grand staircase where they had posed for countless official photographs over the years. Catherine remembered their engagement photos, how young and excited they had looked, completely unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. Now, more than a decade later, they carried themselves with the confidence of experience, but also with the weight of wisdom that comes from navigating the complex waters of royal life. The press gallery is full, William murmured as they approached the final turn toward the throne room. His private secretary had briefed them earlier about the unprecedented level of media interest. Journalists from around the world had descended on London, sensing that this announcement would be historically significant. Catherine nodded, checking her appearance one final time in the reflection of a gilded mirror. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled, but it was her expression that mattered most. The cameras would capture every micro-expression, and body language experts would analyze every gesture. She needed to project calm confidence while supporting her husband through what might be the most difficult speech of his life. As they neared the throne room doors, they could hear the murmur of voices from within. The great and good of British society had gathered: politicians, religious leaders, representatives from the Commonwealth nations, and senior members of the royal household. Each person in that room would have their own opinion about what was about to happen, their own stake in the future of the monarchy. William paused just outside the doors, his hand resting on the ornate handle. For a moment, he looked not like the future king, but like the young man Catherine had met at St. Andrew's University, uncertain about his place in the world and the expectations placed upon him. I keep thinking about my mother, he said quietly, so only Catherine could hear. What she would have thought about this decision. Catherine's heart ached for him. Diana's legacy cast a long shadow over everything William did, her memory both an inspiration and a burden. She had been the people's princess, someone who had tried to modernize the monarchy from within, often at great personal cost. She would have been proud, Catherine said with absolute certainty. She would have understood that sometimes love requires sacrifice, and sometimes duty means challenging tradition. The words seemed to give William the strength he needed. He straightened his shoulders, and when he looked at Catherine, she saw the determination that had carried him through military service, through the loss of his mother, through the transition to full-time royal duties. Your Royal Highnesses, The Lord Chamberlain appeared beside them, his formal manner barely concealing his own nervousness about the day's events. "Everyone is assembled," William nodded. "We're ready." The massive doors swung open, and Catherine felt the familiar rush of stepping into the public eye. The throne room was magnificent in its grandeur, with its soaring ceilings and elaborate chandeliers casting warm light over the assembled crowd. But today, instead of the usual sense of ceremony and celebration, there was an undercurrent of tension, of anticipation for something unprecedented. The crowd rose as they entered, the rustle of fabric and shuffle of feet creating a wave of sound that rolled through the room. Catherine kept her expression serene as they walked toward the podium that had been set up at the far end of the room. She was acutely aware of every camera pointed in their direction, every pair of eyes tracking their movement. As they took their positions, Catherine caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. There was Camilla, now Queen Consort, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes filled with concern. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood with other religious leaders, his presence lending gravity to the proceedings. Members of Parliament sat alongside foreign dignitaries, all united in their curiosity about what had prompted such an unprecedented gathering. William approached the podium and Catherine took her place slightly behind him and to his left, the traditional position for a supporting spouse. From this vantage point, she could see both her husband and the crowd, ready to offer silent support while monitoring the room's reaction to his words. The room fell silent as William removed the folded speech from his pocket. Catherine noticed his hands were steady now, the nervous tremor from earlier replaced by the calm resolve of a man who had made peace with his decision. He looked out, over the assembled crowd for a moment, making eye contact with several key figures before beginning to speak. "Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished guests," his voice carried clearly through the room, trained from years of public speaking to project authority and warmth. "I have asked you here today to witness an announcement that will affect not only my family but the future of the monarchy itself." Catherine felt the tension in the room ratchet up another notch. Mobile phones were discreetly switched to record mode, despite the official prohibition. This was history in the making, and everyone wanted to capture it. "Throughout my life, I have been privileged to serve the Crown and the people of our great nation and the Commonwealth," William continued. "This service has been both an honor and a responsibility that I have never taken lightly." Catherine watched his profile as he spoke, noting the slight tightening around his eyes that only she would recognize as a sign of the emotional cost this was taking. She wanted to reach out and touch his arm, to offer the physical comfort that had always been their way of supporting each other, but she knew the importance of maintaining proper protocol in such a formal setting. However, there comes a time when service to the Crown must be balanced against service to one's conscience and family. William's voice grew stronger with each word. "Today I stand before you to announce a decision that my wife and I have made after months of careful consideration and prayer." The silence in the room was absolute now. Catherine could almost feel the collective held breath of everyone present. Even the usual sounds of the palace, the distant traffic, the ticking of ancient clocks, seemed to have stopped in anticipation. "It is my intention to." William paused, and in that moment of silence, Catherine felt the weight of history pressing down on them. Whatever words came next would be analyzed, debated, and remembered for generations to come. She thought of their children, probably sitting in their classrooms at this very moment, unaware that their father was about to change the course of their lives forever. She thought of the millions of people across the Commonwealth who looked to the royal family for stability and continuity. And she thought of the future they were choosing to create, even if it meant walking away from the future that had been planned for them since birth. William's voice, when he continued, was clear and unwavering, carrying across the silent room like a bell tolling the end of one era and the beginning of another. "It is my intention to step back from my position as heir to the throne and relinquish my place in the line of succession, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Catherine watched as the reaction rippled through the room in waves. First came the sharp intake of breath from those closest to the podium, followed by barely suppressed gasps from the wider audience. The Lord Chamberlain's face went pale, while several members of Parliament leaned forward in their seats as if they hadn't heard correctly. Catherine maintained her composure, though her heart was racing. They had known this moment would be shocking, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different from imagining it. The weight of what William had just announced settled over the room like a heavy blanket, and she could see the struggle in people's faces as they tried to process the implications. William continued speaking, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he had just revealed. This decision has not been made lightly. The Princess of Wales and I have spent countless hours in consultation with His Majesty the King, senior members of the royal household, constitutional experts, and spiritual advisors. Catherine noticed how he emphasized their partnership in the decision, making it clear that this was not a unilateral choice, but something they had arrived at together. She appreciated his careful wording, protecting her from potential blame while making their unity clear. Our children's well-being and future happiness have been at the forefront of our considerations, William went on. Prince George, as my eldest son, would typically follow me in the line of succession. However, we believe that childhood should be about growing up with as much normalcy as possible, free from the immediate pressure of knowing one's entire future is predetermined. Catherine thought of George, barely 10 years old but already showing signs of understanding his unique position. She remembered the conversation they'd had with him just weeks ago, when he'd asked why he couldn't choose his own job like his friends would someday. The innocent question had sparked hours of soul-searching for both parents. The monarchy has evolved throughout history, William continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. It has adapted to changing times while maintaining its core purpose of service to the nation. Today, we announce another evolution, one that prioritizes the well-being of future generations while ensuring the continuity of the crown. A murmur began to build in the room as people started to whisper among themselves. Catherine could see phones being checked discreetly as news alerts began to flood social media. The Archbishop of Canterbury looked thoughtful rather than shocked, suggesting he had been consulted beforehand. Other religious leaders appeared more surprised, their faces reflecting the gravity of what they were witnessing. Under the current constitutional arrangement, my brother Prince Harry would not inherit the throne due to his own decision to step back from royal duties, William explained. Therefore, the succession will pass to our daughter, Princess Charlotte, when she comes of age, with appropriate regency arrangements in place until that time. This revelation caused an even greater stir. Catherine could see the excitement on some faces at the prospect of Charlotte eventually becoming queen, while others looked concerned about the constitutional complexities this would create. A female heir had been possible since the succession laws changed in 2013, but no one had expected it to happen this way. Catherine felt a surge of pride mixed with worry as she thought about Charlotte. Her daughter was strong-willed and intelligent, with a natural confidence that reminded Catherine of William's grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, but she was also just 8 years old, and the idea of her carrying this burden someday was both inspiring and heartbreaking. The Princess of Wales and I will continue to support the monarchy and serve the crown, but in a different capacity, William continued. We will focus our efforts on charitable work, supporting Charlotte as she grows into her future role, and ensuring that George and Louis have the freedom to choose their own paths in life. Catherine could see the logic resonating with some members of the audience. The idea of choice, of giving the next generation options that previous generations hadn't had, seemed to strike a chord particularly with younger attendees. But she could also see the concern on older faces, the worry about breaking with centuries of tradition. His Majesty the King has graciously accepted our decision and will address the nation separately about the arrangements for the regency period, William said, acknowledging the elephant in the room. What would happen in the immediate future with King Charles on the throne and no direct adult heir? Catherine knew that Charles had struggled with their decision. As someone who had waited decades for his own turn to be king, the idea of his son voluntarily giving up that future had been difficult to accept. But eventually he had come to understand their reasoning, particularly when they explained their concerns about George's future happiness. We ask for your understanding and support as our family navigates this transition, William continued. The monarchy has weathered many changes throughout its history, and we are confident it will emerge from this one stronger and more relevant to the modern world. Catherine watched as camera operators zoomed in on her face, trying to capture her reaction to her husband's words. She maintained her dignified expression while inside her emotions churned. Relief at finally having their decision public, mixed with anxiety about the reactions to come. She thought about the children coming home from school to find their lives forever changed, about the conversations they would need to have as a family. The constitutional arrangements for this transition are complex and will be worked out over the coming months with Parliament and the governments of the Commonwealth realms, William said, addressing the practical concerns that were undoubtedly filling the minds of the politicians in the room. Catherine could see Prime Minister Sunak in the front row, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with calculation. This announcement would create months of constitutional work, requiring new legislation and agreements across multiple countries. The practical implications were staggering, but William had insisted they couldn't let bureaucracy dictate their family's future. In closing, William said, his voice taking on a more personal tone, I want to express my deep gratitude for the support and love the British people and the Commonwealth have shown my family. That support has sustained us through difficult times and will continue to mean everything to us as we move forward on this new path. Catherine felt tears threatening for the first time that day. The genuine emotion in her husband's voice, the weight of what they were giving up, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, it all crashed over her at once. But she maintained her composure, knowing that every second was being recorded and analyzed. The monarchy will continue, stronger and more flexible than before, William concluded. And the Princess of Wales and I will continue to serve just in a different way. Thank you. As William stepped back from the podium, the room erupted in a controlled chaos of whispered conversations, rustling papers, and the subtle movement of people trying to position themselves for what would happen next. Catherine moved to stand beside her husband, and for the first time since entering the room allowed herself a small, genuine smile. They had done it. The hardest part was over. But even as relief flooded through her, Catherine knew this was just the beginning of their journey into uncharted territory. The immediate aftermath of William's announcement felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Catherine remained beside her husband as they were surrounded by a carefully orchestrated series of conversations with key figures. The Lord Chamberlain approached first, his decades of experience in managing royal protocols evident in how quickly he had composed himself after the initial shock. Your Royal Highnesses, he said quietly, there are several urgent matters that require immediate attention. His voice carried the weight of a man who understood that the next few hours would determine how smoothly this unprecedented transition would proceed. Catherine watched as William nodded, slipping effortlessly into the practical mode that had served him well throughout his royal career. Even in the midst of such a personal and emotional decision, duty called, and there were protocols to follow, procedures to implement, and damage control to manage. The Archbishop of Canterbury approached them next, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. Your Royal Highness, he said to William, I want you to know that your decision, while surprising, comes from a place of love and careful consideration that I deeply respect. His words carried significant weight, given the Church's role in the monarchy and the potential religious implications of the succession change. Catherine felt a wave of gratitude toward the Archbishop. His immediate support would help legitimize their decision in the eyes of many who might otherwise view it as abandoning duty. The Church's blessing, or at least understanding, was crucial for maintaining the monarchy's spiritual foundation. As they moved through the room, Catherine could hear fragments of whispered conversations around them. Some voices carried excitement about the prospect of eventually having a queen again, while others expressed concern about the constitutional complications this would create. The reactions were as varied as she had expected, but the overall tone was more supportive than she had dared to hope. Prime Minister Sunak made his way through the crowd toward them, his expression carefully diplomatic. Catherine knew that behind that composed exterior, his mind was racing through the legislative implications of what they had just announced. The government would need to work with Parliament to address the constitutional questions this raised. Your Royal Highness, Sunak said as he reached them, this is certainly an unexpected development. The government will, of course, work to ensure a smooth transition and address any constitutional requirements. His words were measured, politically safe, but Catherine could hear the underlying stress in his voice. "Prime Minister," William replied, "we appreciate the government's support during this transition. We recognize the complexities this creates and are committed to working through them constructively." The exchange was formal but cordial, laying the groundwork for the cooperation that would be essential in the coming months. Catherine noticed her personal protection officer discreetly positioning himself nearby, ready for their eventual departure. The security implications of their decision had been another factor in their deliberations. Stepping back from direct succession might actually reduce some of the security threats they faced, particularly for the children. As they continued to navigate the room, Catherine caught sight of several foreign dignitaries clustered together in animated discussion. She recognized the Canadian High Commissioner and the Australian representative, both of whom would need to report back to their governments about the implications for the Commonwealth realms. The ripple effects of this decision would be felt far beyond British shores. "Aunt Catherine," a familiar voice called out softly. Catherine turned to see Princess Anne approaching, her usual no-nonsense expression softened by what looked suspiciously like approval. Anne had always been one of the hardest-working royals, and her opinion carried significant weight within the family. "Anne," Catherine greeted her warmly. Despite their formal titles, family relationships remained important, especially during moments like these. "That took courage," Anne said simply. Her words meant for both William and Catherine. "Your grandmother would have understood, I think. She always said the monarchy must evolve to survive." The reference to Queen Elizabeth II brought a lump to Catherine's throat. The late Queen's memory loomed large over their decision, and having Anne's blessing felt like receiving approval from beyond the grave. Elizabeth had navigated decades of change and would have appreciated the thought and care that had gone into this choice. A commotion near the entrance caught Catherine's attention. Through the crowd, she could see more media personnel being admitted along with additional palace staff. The news was spreading rapidly beyond the throne room, and the apparatus of royal communications was swinging into action to manage the narrative. "We should probably head to the private apartments soon," William murmured to her. "The children will be home from school within the hour, and they should hear the details from us before they see it on the news." Catherine nodded, thinking about the conversations that lay ahead. George, Charlotte, and Louis would need age-appropriate explanations of what their father had just announced. George, in particular, would need help understanding how this changed his own future. That instead of inheriting pressure, he had been given freedom. As they began to make their way toward the exit, Catherine reflected on the surreal nature of the past hour. They had just announced one of the most significant changes to the British monarchy in centuries, yet in many ways it felt like a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The uncertainty was frightening, but there was also liberation in finally speaking their truth. The walk back through the corridors felt different now. The portraits of previous monarchs seemed less imposing, more like family photos than symbols of an overwhelming legacy. Catherine found herself noticing details she had overlooked before, the way the afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, the intricate patterns in the carpet, the distant sounds of normal palace life continuing despite the extraordinary announcement they had just made. "Any regrets?" Catherine asked William as they reached the relative privacy of a smaller corridor. He considered the question seriously before answering. "About the decision?" "No, about the timing, the method, the inevitable complications. Maybe. But the core decision feels right in a way that few things in my life have." Catherine understood what he meant. So much of royal life involved compromise and duty over personal preference. This decision had been driven by their values as parents and their vision for their children's futures, rather than by protocol or expectation. As they approached their private quarters, Catherine could hear the distant sound of cars arriving. Undoubtedly more media, officials and family members responding to the news. The next few hours would be a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and careful message management. But first, they had 3 children to talk to. 3 young lives whose futures had just been dramatically altered by their parents' choice. Catherine thought about Charlotte's reaction when she learned that someday she might be queen. About George's relief at discovering his path was no longer predetermined. About Louis's innocent questions about why everything was suddenly different. "Ready for the hardest conversation of the day?" William asked as they reached their door. Catherine squeezed his hand. "Ready," she said, though her heart was beating fast with anticipation of explaining to their children that sometimes love means making the difficult choice, even when the whole world is watching. The sound of children's voices echoing through the hallway announced their arrival home from school, before Catherine even saw them. George's deeper voice mixed with Charlotte's animated chatter, and Louis's excited interruptions as they discussed their day with their protection officers. Catherine felt her heart clench with both love and anxiety, as she realized this would be the last normal afternoon they would have for quite some time. "Mommy, Daddy." Louis burst through the door first, his school bag trailing behind him and his uniform already showing signs of an active day on the playground. At 7 years old, he possessed an endless energy that could light up any room. And today was no exception. Charlotte followed close behind, her expression curious as she noticed something different in her parents' demeanor. At 8, she had inherited her father's perceptiveness and her mother's emotional intelligence, making her remarkably good at reading the adults around her. George entered last, moving with the measured pace of someone who was beginning to understand the weight of his position, even at 10 years old. Catherine could see William in his eldest son's careful observation of the room, the way he assessed his parents' mood before speaking. "How was school?" Catherine asked, settling onto the comfortable sofa in their family sitting room. This was their sanctuary, the one place in the palace that felt completely private and normal, decorated with family photos and the children's artwork rather than priceless antiques. "Mrs. Patterson said something funny happened at the palace today," Charlotte said, settling beside her mother. "She said there were lots of cars and cameras outside. Are we having another big party?" Catherine and William exchanged glances. News was traveling faster than they had anticipated, though they had expected the media attention would be impossible to hide from the children completely. "Actually," William said, sitting down across from them, "Mummy and I need to talk to all of you about something important, something that affects our whole family." Louis immediately abandoned his attempt to unpack his school bag and climbed onto William's lap, sensing from his father's tone that this was serious. George moved closer but remained standing, his posture unconsciously mimicking his father's formal bearing. "Are you getting divorced?" Charlotte asked suddenly, her young face serious with worry, because Emma's parents had a family meeting before they told her they were getting divorced. "No, sweetheart," Catherine said quickly, reaching out to touch Charlotte's hand. "Daddy and I love each other very much, and we're not getting divorced. This is about something else entirely." William cleared his throat, and Catherine could see him gathering his thoughts, trying to find age-appropriate words for concepts that even adults were struggling to understand. "Do you remember how we've talked about how Grandpa Charles is the king now, and someday I might be king after him?" All three children nodded. This had been explained to them gradually over the years, with particular attention to helping George understand his eventual role. "Well," William continued, "Mummy and I have decided that we want to make some changes to how our family works. We want to give all of you more choices about your futures." "What kind of choices?" George asked, his voice carrying a maturity that sometimes surprised Catherine. He had grown up faster than his siblings, partly due to his position but also because of his naturally serious nature. Catherine took a deep breath before speaking. "George, you know that traditionally, as the eldest son, you would follow Daddy in line to be king someday. But we've decided that you should have the freedom to choose your own path in life, just like other children do." George's eyes widened, and Catherine could see his mind working through the implications. "You mean I don't have to be king?" "You don't have to be king," William confirmed gently. "You can be anything you want to be, a teacher, a pilot, a scientist, anything that makes you happy." The relief on George's face was immediate and profound. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes as she watched her eldest son's shoulders visibly relax, as if a weight he had been carrying had suddenly been lifted. "But what about the king thing?" Louis asked, his 7-year-old mind struggling with the concept. "Who's going to do that job?" "Well," Catherine said carefully, "that's where Charlotte comes in. If she wants to, when she's much older, she could become queen." Charlotte's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes lit up with excitement and she sat up straighter. "Really? I could be queen like Gangan was?" "Really," William confirmed, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "But only if you want to. You would have lots of time to think about it and learn about what it means. And if you decide you don't want to, that's okay too." "Would I get to wear the crown?" Charlotte asked, her practical mind immediately jumping to the most tangible aspect of royalty. Someday, yes, if you choose that path. Catherine laughed, relieved by her daughter's positive reaction. But there's so much more to being queen than wearing crowns. It's about helping people and serving the country. Louis looked between his siblings with the confusion of the youngest child watching a conversation that was largely over his head. What about me? He asked. You, my love, William said, pulling Louis closer. Get to be completely free to choose whatever makes you happy. You can have adventures and travel and be anything you want to be. Louis seemed satisfied with this answer, though Catherine suspected he didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what they were discussing. At 7, the concept of future careers was still abstract, and the idea of being king was more like a story than a real possibility. Are people going to be angry about this? George asked, displaying the political awareness that came with his position. I heard some of the teachers talking about how change makes people upset sometimes. Catherine felt her heart break a little at the question. At 10 years old, her son was already thinking about public opinion and political ramifications. It reinforced her conviction that they had made the right choice in giving him the freedom to be a child. Some people might be confused or upset at first. William said honestly, change can be scary even when it's good change. But we believe that most people will understand that we're doing this because we love you all so much. And because we want the monarchy to be strong for the future, Catherine added. Sometimes the best way to protect something special is to help it change and grow. Charlotte had been unusually quiet for several minutes, and Catherine could see her daughter working through something in her mind. Finally, she spoke up. If I become queen someday, will I have to live in the big scary rooms upstairs? Catherine and William both laughed at the question, remembering Charlotte's complaints about the formal staterooms during official events. We would make sure you have comfortable places to live, Catherine assured her. Being queen doesn't mean you can't have a home that feels cozy and safe. And you'll help me learn how to do it right? Charlotte pressed. Every step of the way, William promised. And you'll have lots of time to grow up and learn before you need to make any big decisions. George had been listening to his sister's questions with growing interest. You know, he said thoughtfully, I think Charlotte would be a really good queen. She's already bossy enough. George, Charlotte protested, but she was smiling. I mean it in a good way, George clarified quickly. Queens need to be able to tell people what to do, and you're really good at that. Catherine watched the exchange with a mixture of amusement and pride. Her children were handling this news with remarkable resilience, finding ways to support each other even as their entire futures shifted around them. So what happens now? George asked, returning to practical concerns. Do we still live here? Do I still go to the same school? For now, everything stays the same, William assured him. We'll still live here, you'll still go to the same schools, and we'll still be a family. The only thing that's changed is that you have more freedom to choose your future. As Catherine looked around at her family, William holding Louis, Charlotte curled up beside her, and George standing protectively near his siblings, she felt a profound sense of peace. They had just turned the monarchy upside down, but they had also given their children something precious, the gift of choice, and the knowledge that they were loved enough for their parents to sacrifice tradition for their happiness. 3 hours after their family conversation, Catherine found herself in the surreal position of watching her husband's announcement being replayed on every news channel across the globe. The children had been settled with their homework and evening activities, blissfully unaware that their faces were now being shown on television screens worldwide, as commentators speculated about their futures. The response had been swift and overwhelming. Catherine's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family members, and royal staff, while William was in back-to-back calls with officials trying to manage the immediate fallout. The palace press office was working overtime to coordinate with media outlets and government communications teams. Look at this, William said, returning from his latest phone call and gesturing toward the television, where a panel of royal experts was deep in animated discussion about the constitutional implications of their decision. They're calling it everything from revolutionary modernization to the end of tradition as we know it. Catherine shook her head in amazement as she scrolled through social media on her tablet. The hashtags Deutsche Royal Choice and Das Modern Monarchy were trending worldwide, with thousands of comments pouring in from people around the globe. The reactions were as varied as she had expected. Some praised their courage and modern thinking, while others expressed concern about breaking with centuries of tradition. The Prime Minister of Canada wants to schedule a call, William continued, sitting down heavily beside her, as does the Governor-General of Australia. Apparently, the constitutional lawyers are having field days trying to work out what this means for the Commonwealth realms. Catherine looked up from her tablet where she had been reading a particularly thoughtful piece from a constitutional scholar at Oxford. It's fascinating how people are interpreting this so differently. Some see it as strengthening the monarchy by making it more flexible, while others view it as weakening it by introducing uncertainty. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. William's private secretary entered, carrying a thick folder of papers and wearing the slightly overwhelmed expression that had become common among palace staff that day. "Your Royal Highnesses," he said, "I have updates from the communications team and several requests that require your immediate attention." Catherine set aside her tablet, recognizing the tone that meant serious business. "What's the most urgent?" "His Majesty would like to speak with you both before his address to the nation tomorrow evening," the secretary replied. "He's asked if you could join him for breakfast in the morning to coordinate the messaging." William nodded. "Of course. What else?" "The Archbishop of Canterbury has released a statement supporting your decision, emphasizing the importance of family and the evolution of service." "That's been very helpful in setting a positive tone." The secretary consulted his notes. "However, there are some members of Parliament expressing concerns about the constitutional process and whether proper procedures were followed." Catherine had expected this. The British system was built on precedent and proper procedure, and their announcement had necessarily bypassed many of the usual consultative processes in order to present a unified decision rather than a prolonged period of speculation and debate. "What kind of concerns?" William asked. "Primarily about the succession laws and whether Charlotte can inherit directly, skipping over Harry despite his voluntary withdrawal from royal duties. There are also questions about the regency arrangements during the interim period." Catherine felt a headache beginning to form as she considered the legal complexities they had unleashed. Constitutional law professors would probably be writing papers about this decision for decades to come. "There's also been a surge of interest in Princess Charlotte herself," the secretary continued more carefully. "Several media outlets are requesting interviews or photo shoots, and there's been discussion about her becoming the face of the modern monarchy." "Absolutely not," Catherine said immediately, her protective instincts flaring. "Charlotte is 8 years old. She gets to be a child, not a symbol or a media commodity." William nodded emphatically. "Make it clear that the children are off limits for any media requests related to this decision. Charlotte will have plenty of time to grow into her potential role without being turned into a public figure at 8 years old." The secretary made notes, clearly expecting this response but needing the official position stated clearly. "The communications team also wanted me to ask about your availability for interviews. There's enormous global interest in hearing directly from both of you about the reasoning behind the decision." Catherine and William exchanged glances. They had discussed this possibility, knowing that their announcement would generate demands for explanation and elaboration. But they had also agreed that the speech itself should stand as their official statement, at least initially. "Not yet," William decided. "Let the dust settle for a few days. We want people to process what we've said before we start explaining and defending it." As the secretary left with his instructions, Catherine moved to the window overlooking the palace gardens. Even in the growing dusk, she could see the lights from the media encampment beyond the gates, a constant reminder that their private decision had become a matter of international public interest. "Do you think we underestimated how big this would become?" she asked William, watching a helicopter circle overhead with news cameras. William joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I think we knew it would be huge, but experiencing it is different from anticipating it." Catherine leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his presence. The magnitude of what they had set in motion was becoming clearer by the hour, but she still felt confident in their core decision. "The children seem to be handling it well," she observed. Earlier, when Charlotte had asked if she would need to start learning how to wave properly, Catherine had been struck by her daughter's practical approach to the news. "George looked relieved in a way I haven't seen since he started understanding what being heir meant," William agreed. "And Charlotte's excitement is infectious. Did you see her trying on your tiara in the mirror earlier?" Catherine laughed. remembering catching their daughter posing regally in front of the full-length mirror with Catherine's small diamond tiara perched on her head. She has the confidence for it, that's certain. I just hope we can preserve that confidence while helping her understand the weight of what it might mean. A new thought occurred to Catherine as she watched the media circus below. What about Harry? Have you spoken to him since the announcement? William's arms tightened slightly around her. The relationship with his brother remained complicated, marked by Harry's own dramatic departure from royal life and the ongoing tensions that had followed. He sent a text congratulating us on having the courage to choose our own path. I think he understands better than most what it means to prioritize family over tradition. Catherine felt a surge of hope at this news. Perhaps their decision might even help heal some of the rifts within the family, showing that there could be different ways to serve and different definitions of duty. Your father's been quiet today, Catherine observed, thinking about the conversations they still needed to have with King Charles about the practical implications of their choice. He's processing, William said diplomatically. This isn't the future he planned for, but I think he's beginning to see the wisdom in it. And he adores Charlotte. The idea of her eventually becoming queen isn't entirely unwelcome to him. As if summoned by their conversation, Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from Camilla. Charles is proud of you both, even if he's struggling to show it right now. Change is hard for him, but love is easy. Give him time. Catherine showed the message to William, who smiled for the first time in hours. She has a way of cutting through to the heart of things, doesn't she? As they stood together watching the world react to their decision, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support they were receiving from unexpected quarters. The road ahead would be complicated and sometimes difficult, but they weren't walking it alone. No regrets? William asked, echoing her question from earlier in the day. Catherine considered the question seriously, thinking about everything that had happened since that morning's quiet moment at the window. No regrets, she confirmed. Just determination to make sure we've made the right choice for all the right reasons. 6 months later, Catherine stood in the same spot by the window where this journey had begun, watching the autumn leaves fall in the palace gardens. The media circus had long since moved on to other stories, though the constitutional work continued behind the scenes. Parliament had been surprisingly efficient in addressing the legal framework for their decision, and the Commonwealth realms had adapted with more grace than anyone had anticipated. The children had settled into their new reality with the resilience that constantly amazed Catherine. George had thrown himself into his studies with renewed enthusiasm, knowing that his academic choices were now truly his own. He had recently announced his intention to study marine biology, inspired by a documentary about ocean conservation that had captured his imagination. Charlotte had embraced her potential future role with characteristic determination, asking thoughtful questions about Queen Elizabeth II's reign and requesting books about previous queens. But she had also insisted on continuing her ballet lessons and her plans to try out for the school football team, declaring that future queens should be well-rounded. Louis remained blissfully focused on 7-year-old concerns like mastering his times tables and convincing his parents to get a dog. Though he had developed an endearing habit of introducing Charlotte to new people as my sister who might be queen someday. The Japanese delegation was impressed with Charlotte yesterday, William said, joining Catherine at the window. They had begun including Charlotte in certain low-key royal engagements, helping her gradually understand the ceremonial aspects of royal life without overwhelming her. Catherine smiled, remembering how naturally Charlotte had conversed with the visiting dignitaries, asking them about children in Japan and whether they had ever seen a real cherry blossom tree. She has your grandmother's gift for making people feel at ease. And your ability to ask exactly the right questions, William added, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that had become their ritual during these quiet morning moments. The past 6 months had not been without challenges. There had been intense media scrutiny, political debates, and family tensions to navigate. Some traditionalists had struggled to accept the changes, while constitutional scholars had engaged in spirited debates about precedent and procedure. But there had also been an unexpected outpouring of support from people who saw their decision as a modernization that strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy. Do you remember what you were most worried about that morning? Catherine asked, leaning back against William's chest. That we were being selfish, William admitted. That we were putting our own desires ahead of duty and tradition. Catherine nodded. And now? Now I think we were being responsible, William said with quiet confidence. We were thinking about the long-term health of the institution, not just the immediate expectations. The transformation in George had been perhaps the most telling indicator that they had made the right choice. Their eldest son had blossomed in ways that surprised everyone, showing interests and talents that had been suppressed under the weight of his presumed future. His teachers reported a new enthusiasm for learning, and his confidence had grown noticeably once the pressure of his predetermined path had been lifted. Charlotte asked me yesterday if being queen would mean she couldn't have pets, Catherine said, chuckling at the memory. I told her about your grandmother's corgis, and she seemed very relieved. She's been talking to the palace staff about modernizing the coronation ceremony when her time comes, William added with amusement. Apparently, she thinks there should be more music and fewer stuffy speeches. Catherine could easily picture Charlotte as an adult, bringing her natural warmth and modern sensibilities to the ancient institution. The idea no longer filled her with anxiety as it had 6 months ago. Instead, she felt excited about the kind of monarch her daughter might become, shaped by choice rather than obligation. A knock at the door interrupted their morning reflection. King Charles entered, carrying a cup of tea and wearing the relaxed expression that had become more common since the initial shock of their decision had worn off. Good morning, he said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs near the window. The morning visits had become a tradition, a way for the three of them to coordinate their activities and maintain family unity, despite the unusual circumstances. How did the Commonwealth Conference call go? William asked, referring to Charles's latest discussion with the other realm governments about the succession arrangements. Better than expected, Charles replied with evident relief. The Canadians are actually quite enthusiastic about Charlotte's eventual succession. They see it as progressive and modern, fitting with their values. Catherine felt a surge of gratitude for the international support they had received. The decision to change the succession had required cooperation from multiple governments, and the positive response had made the legal and constitutional processes much smoother than anticipated. And the latest polls? Catherine asked, though she had tried to avoid becoming too focused on public opinion. 73% approval in the UK, even higher among younger demographics, Charles said with something approaching pride. It seems the public appreciates having a royal family that prioritizes family welfare and modernization. Catherine reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. The initial shock and uncertainty had given way to a new normal that felt more authentic and sustainable than what they had left behind. The monarchy continued to function. Public support remained strong, and most importantly, their children were thriving. Charlotte wants to know if she can have an input on her future coronation dress, Catherine said, sharing the latest example of their daughter's practical approach to her potential role. Charles laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as he watched his granddaughter's enthusiasm for her possible future. She reminds me of your grandmother at that age, determined and unafraid of responsibility, but also free to choose differently if she changes her mind, William added, emphasizing the point that remained central to their decision. Catherine looked out at the gardens where she could see palace staff preparing for the day's activities. The routine of royal life continued, but it felt different now, less constrained by rigid tradition and more focused on meaningful service and genuine choice. Do you think history will judge us kindly? Catherine asked, voicing a question that had occupied her thoughts during quiet moments. Charles considered the question seriously before answering. I think history will judge you as parents who loved their children enough to give them choices, and as royals who understood that the monarchy's survival depends on its ability to evolve. That seems like a pretty good legacy to me. As Catherine stood surrounded by her family, watching the world wake up beyond the palace walls, she felt a deep sense of peace about the path they had chosen. They had traded certainty for possibility, tradition for choice, and predetermined roles for authentic service. It had been the right decision then, and it remained the right decision now. The farewell to their old life had been difficult, but the hello to their new one had been filled with unexpected joy and freedom. And most importantly, their children would grow up knowing they were loved enough to be given choices, and strong enough to handle whatever future they decided to create for themselves. In the distance, Catherine could hear Charlotte's laughter echoing through the corridors as she raced to get ready for school, carrying with her the confidence of a child who knew she could be anything she wanted to be, even a queen, if she chose. And that knowledge, Catherine realized, was the greatest gift they could have given, not just to their daughter but to the monarchy itself.